Hello everyone. Let's jump straight into how we put a safety net around our project's finances, which is the process of contingency budgeting. In a professional sense, this is the process of allocating specific funds within the cost baseline to cover identified risks that have been accepted and for which response strategies have been developed. Now, in plain English, this is your just in case bucket of money. It's the cash you set aside for the problems you have already spotted hiding in the bushes. Think of it like going on a road trip. You've budgeted for your gas and your hotels, but you also tuck a couple of $100 into the glove box because you know there's a chance you might get a flat tire or need a tow. You don't hope you'll need it, but you're a pro, so you're ready for it. I once worked on a construction project where they refused to budget for bad weather, even though we were building in the rainy season. When the storms inevitably came, they had to stop work because they couldn't pay for the extra pumping equipment. Stay with me here, because budgeting for these known unknowns is what keeps a project alive when things get messy. So, now that we've mastered the idea that we need a specific bucket for identified risks, you might be wondering how this sits within the big picture of the whole project budget. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is understanding the cost baseline. To understand where a contingency lives, we have to look at the cost baseline. Formally, the cost baseline is the approved version of the time-phased project budget, excluding any management reserves, which can only be changed through formal change control procedures. To put that in very simple terms, this is the official spending plan. It's the amount of money the boss has authorized you to spend to get the job done, and it includes your contingency. Let's break this down together. Imagine your total project is a big loaf of bread. Most of that loaf is for the work itself, the flour and water. But a few slices are saved specifically for your contingency risks. Together, they make up the baseline. You've probably seen this at the office when your finance department asks for a risk-adjusted budget. They want to see the work cost plus the safety net. So now that we've mastered the idea that our contingency is part of our official approved plan, you might be wondering what happens when a disaster strikes that wasn't even on our list. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is the management reserve. Now watch how this connects, because there is a secret vault sitting just above your baseline called a management reserve. In a professional sense, this is an amount of the total project budget withheld for management control purposes and is reserved for unforeseen work that is within the scope of the project. In everyday language, this is the black swan fund for unknown unknowns. These are for the things that are so crazy you couldn't have put them in your risk register even if you tried. Think of it like your house budget again. The contingency was for a leaky pipe you suspected might happen. The management reserve is for if a meteor hits your roof. You didn't plan for it, and as a project manager, you usually don't own this money. You have to go to the executives and ask for permission to use it. I remember a project where a sudden international trade war started overnight. We had to use the management reserve because nobody could have predicted that specific maybe. So now that we've mastered the two different layers of protection, the one you control and the one the bosses control, you might be wondering how we decide exactly how many dollars to put in your contingency bucket. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is the use of quantitative analysis for budgeting. To move away from gut feelings and toward real science, we use quantitative analysis to set our budget. Formally, this involves using numerical techniques like Monte Carlo simulations or expected monetary value (EMV) to estimate the total amount of contingency needed based on the combined impact of all identified risks. In simple English, this is math-based guessing. Instead of just picking a lucky number like 10%, we use data to see the most likely outcome. Let's break this down together. If you have 10 risks and each has a 10% chance of costing $1,000, your expected cost is $1,000 total. You've likely seen those S-curve charts that show a range of possible costs. As an RMP, you look at that chart and say, to be 90% sure we finish on budget, we need a contingency of $50,000. It gives you a shield of data when you're talking to stakeholders. So now that we've mastered how to use math to find the right number, you might be wondering how we make sure we don't spend all that safety money on the very first day. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is reserve analysis. Don't worry, we'll take it slow here because managing the money is just as important as getting it. This is called reserve analysis. In a professional sense, this is an analytical technique to compare the amount of contingency reserve remaining to the amount of risk remaining at any given time in the project. To put that in plain English, it's checking the gas gauge. As you finish parts of the project, those risks go away. If you finish the foundation of a building and it didn't rain, you don't need that rain contingency anymore. You can actually give that money back or move it to a different risk. I once coached a PM who kept all his contingency until the very last day of the project, even though the risks were long gone. He was sitting on a pile of cash that could have been used for other important projects. At the office, we do this every month to make sure the safety net matches the height of the risks we are currently facing. So now that we've mastered the idea of constantly adjusting our reserves as risks disappear, you might be wondering how we prove to the auditors that we spent this money correctly. Well, that brings us right into our final step, which is funding reconciliation and reporting. To wrap this all together, we have to talk about reconciliation. This is the process of comparing the actual money spent on risk responses against the planned contingency budget and reporting those variations to leadership. In very simple terms, it's showing your receipts. You have to prove that you didn't just use the contingency to buy fancy coffee for the team. You used it to solve the specific problems you identified. Good budgeting means that when a risk occurs, you have the money ready, you spend it, and you document it. It builds huge trust with your stakeholders when they see that your maybe funds are being used exactly how you promised. And that, my friends, is the essence of contingency budgeting. It's about turning financial uncertainty into a managed professional plan. So, now that we've mastered the full journey from the glove box cash to the mathematical S-curve, you're ready to see how this fits into the overall execution of your risk responses. We are going to discuss management reserves in details in next chapter.